Welcome back to another Investing Advice Roundtable. As the end of the year quickly approaches, we thought it was an opportune time to discuss some year-end tax planning tips. But first, how are you guys?
I'm doing good, but the one thing that I just want to ask about is we're right here in holiday season. I want to know what everybody's doing in the midst of the holidays.
Good question. I'm definitely behind in my Christmas shopping, so I'm feeling a little stressed about that. But my favorite holiday tradition is my parents always throw a really big party at their house every year on Christmas Day night. And we always try to include everyone who we know maybe couldn't go home for the holidays and has nowhere to go. So it's always a really good time and a great group of people.
That's nice.
Larry, what do you do?
Well, I'm Jewish, so I actually don't celebrate Christmas, but this year, Hanukkah, which lasts 8 days, actually falls on Christmas. So I'm going over to my sister's and going to hang out with my two nephews. So it should be a lot of fun.
Well, good. Well, since you brought up the kids, it reminds me that my life right now is surrounded with Elf on the Shelf. I have one for my daughter, one for my son, and I feel like this is just almost a punishment for parents because every night I'm scrambling trying to figure out where I haven't already hid them, whether I need to supply candy or jokes or whatever it's going to be. So to say that these two little dolls can cause anxiety this time of the year, along with everything else, is an understatement. So when we talked about like topics we can discuss for end of the year, I feel like it's a very important time for us to talk about taxes and maybe how we can just reduce the anxiety that comes with tax planning for the end of the year.
Totally. I think that's so spot on, Holly. And I think the main reason that people get so anxious around tax time, myself included, is that they've delayed important things like organizing their paperwork, contacting their accountant, and taking advantage of opportunities that could lessen their tax burden. While you're on your own for tackling the first two, we as financial advisors can help you with the last point, taking advantage of opportunities that could lessen your tax burden. In fact, there are a number of ways you can potentially reduce next year's tax obligations. Larry, what's the one tax planning tip that you feel is overlooked frequently?
Well, I always recommend to my clients to take a look at losses. If you think your investments will produce capital gains, whether short or long term, you can offset these with capital losses. For assets that you hold less than a year, any gains considered short term, these are taxed at ordinary rates from 10 to 37%, and you can offset these with short-term losses. For assets that you hold longer than a year, considered long-term, any gains are taxed at a top rate of 20%, which can reduce by, you guessed it, long-term capital losses. Just remember, if losses are greater than your gains, then there's good news. You can deduct up to $3,000 in capital losses against your ordinary income on that year's tax return and carry forward any unused losses to future years.
That's an excellent point, Larry. But the one thing that I would like to remind everyone is that you want to avoid short-term capital gains, if at all possible, since they are taxed at higher rates. To do so, if you believe you'll have a short-term gain for the year, try to either offset it with a short-term loss or consider holding the asset for at least a year when they will then turn into a long-term asset and taxed at a lower rate. This requires you to review your portfolio regularly and estimate your gains and losses. Most capital gains and losses are triggered when you sell the assets, offering you to control over the event. However, others, like mutual funds, for instance, are difficult to predict as they are made up of a number of assets. If you find assets that have performed poorly, consider using them to offset your gains, as it would reduce your capital gains tax.
Keep in mind that it's beneficial to elect a loss before a gain because you can carry over unused losses to future years where capital gains are taxed in the year that they occur. As tax laws change often and are complex, consider speaking with a tax professional to help you manage your tax burden. Thanks for listening. And as you may already know, you can check out other videos on our YouTube channel. And we've also just launched a podcast on Spotify. So make sure to subscribe to that as well to hear about all the ongoings with this project. Thanks so much for listening.